rather the existence of the relation that can transform a mere function of money into a function of capital. In the conception of money capital, we customarily find 2-116 the metamorphoses of capital in their circuit-connected errors. For the time being, we only deal with money capital in connection with the specific function in which it confronts us here. Firstly, the functions that capital value performs as money capital, and which it is able to perform because it happens to be in the money form, are erroneously ascribed to its character as capital, whereas they are implied due to the money state of the capital value, its form of appearance as money. Secondly, and inversely, the specific content of the money function that makes it simultaneously a function of capital is deduced from the nature of money. Money is here confused with capital, whereas this function presupposes social conditions, as here in the Act ML, that are in no way given simply by commodity circulation and the money circulation corresponding to it. The purchase and sale of slaves is also in its form a purchase and sale of commodities. Without the existence of slaves, however, money cannot fulfill this function. If there is slavery, then money can be spent on the acquisition of slaves. But money in the hand of the buyer is in no way a sufficient condition for the existence of slavery. If the sale of one's own labor power, in the form of the sale of one's own labor, or the wage form, is not an isolated phenomenon, but the socially decisive precondition for the production of commodities, i.e. if money capital performs the function here considered, M_CL, MP throughout society, this fact implies the occurrence of historic processes through which the original connection between means of production and labor power was dissolved. Processes as a result of which the mass of the people, the workers, come face to face with the non-workers, the former as non-owners, the latter as the owners, of these means of production. It is quite irrelevant whether the original connection, before it was destroyed, took the form that the worker belonged together with the other means of production as a means of production himself, or whether he was their owner. Thus, the situation that underlies the Act M_CL is one of distribution, not distribution in the customary sense of distribution of the means of consumption, but rather the distribution of the elements of production themselves, with the objective factors concentrated on one side, and labor power isolated from them on the other. The means of production, the objective portion of productive capital, must thus already face the worker as such, as capital, before the Act ML can become general throughout society. The circuit of money capital 117. We have already seen how capitalist production, once it is established, not only reproduces this separation in the course of its development, but also expands on an ever greater scale until it has become the generally prevailing social condition. But this also has another side to it. For capital to be formed and to take hold of production, trade must have developed to a certain level, hence also commodity circulation and, with that, commodity production. For articles cannot go into circulation as commodities except in so far as they are produced for sale, i.e. as commodities. It is only on the basis of capitalist production that commodity production appears as the normal, prevailing character of production. The Russian landowners, who in consequence of the so-called emancipation of the peasants now conduct their farming with wage laborers instead of with the forced labor of serfs, have two complaints. Firstly, they complain of the lack of money capital. They say, for example, that before the harvest is sold, the wage laborers have to be paid a considerable amount, and the basic condition for this, a supply of ready cash, is lacking. Capital in the form of money must constantly be available, precisely for the payment of wages, in order that production may be conducted on a capitalist basis. But the landlords need not worry. Everything comes to those who wait, and in time the industrial capitalist will have at his disposal not only his own money, but also l'argent d'autres. The second complaint is more typical, namely that, even when they have money, the labor power to be bought is not available in sufficient quantity and at the right time. This is because the Russian agricultural worker, owing to the common ownership of the soil by the village community, is not yet fully separated from his means of production, and is thus still not a free wage laborer in the full sense of the term. But the presence of such free wage laborers throughout society is the indispensable condition without which the transformation of money into commodities, cannot take the form of the transformation of money capital into productive capital. It goes without saying, therefore, that the formula for the circuit of money capital, MCP. CM, is the self-evident form of the circuit of capital only on the basis of already developed capitalist production, because it presupposes the availability of the class of wage. See Capital Volume 1, Parts 7 and 8, particularly Chapter 32. Other people's money. For Marx's definition of industrial capital, in this sense see below, page 133. 118 The metamorphoses of capital and TR circuit laborers in sufficient numbers throughout society. As we have seen, capitalist production produces not only commodities and surplus value, it reproduces, and on an ever-extended scale, the class of wage laborers, and transforms the immense majority of direct producers into wage laborers. Since the first precondition of CM is the continuous availability of the class of wage laborers, it already implies the existence of capital in the form of productive capital, and hence the form of the circuit of productive capital. 2. Second stage. The function of productive capital. The circuit of capital being considered here begins with the act of circulation MC, the transformation of money into commodities, i.e. purchase. This circulation must therefore be supplemented by the opposite metamorphosis CM, the transformation of commodities into money, sale. But the direct result of M_CL is an interruption in MP, the circulation of the capital value advanced in the money form. By the transformation of money capital into productive capital, the capital value has received a natural form in which it cannot circulate any further, but has to go into consumption, that is, into productive consumption. The use of labor power, labor, can be realized only in the labor process. The capitalist cannot sell the worker again as a commodity, for he is not his slave, and the capitalist has bought nothing more than the utilization of his labor power for a certain time. He can make use of this labor power only insofar as it enables him to make use of the means of production to fashion commodities. The result of the first stage is thus capital's entry into the second stage, its productive stage. The movement presents itself as M_C L. P. The dots indicating MP that the circulation of capital is interrupted, but its circuit continues, with its passage from the sphere of commodity circulation into that of production. The first stage, the transformation of money capital into productive capital, thus appears as no more than the prelude and introduction to the second stage, the function of productive capital. M_C L presupposes that the individual who performs this act does MP not just have at his disposal values in some useful form or other, but the circuit of money capital 119 that he possesses say values in money form, that he is the possessor of money. The act, however, consists precisely in letting go of money, and the possessor of money can only remain so insofar as the money will implicitly flow back to him as a result of the very act of letting go of it. This act thus presupposes that he is a commodity producer. ML the wage laborer lives only from the sale of his labor power. Its maintenance, his own maintenance, requires daily consumption. His payment must therefore be constantly repeated at short intervals, to enable him to repeat the purchases, the act LMC or CMC, that are needed for this self-maintenance. Hence the capitalist must constantly confront him as money capitalist, and his capita, as money capital. On the other hand, however, in order that the mass of direct producers, the wage laborers, may perform the act LMC, they must constantly encounter the necessary means of subsistence in purchasable form, i.e. in the form of commodities. Thus, this situation in itself demands a high degree of circulation of products as commodities, i.e. commodity production on a large scale. As soon as production by way of wage labor becomes general, commodity production must be the general form of production. Assuming this to be the case, commodity production in turn brings about an ever-growing division of social labor, i.e. an ever greater specialization of the products produced as commodities by particular capitalists, an ever greater division of complementary production processes into independent ones. MMP therefore develops to the same degree as ML. The production of means of production is separated to the same extent from the production of the commodities whose means of production they are. These two confront each commodity producer as commodities which he does not himself produce, but buys for the purpose of his particular production process. They come from branches of production that are pursued in complete separation and independence from his own, and enter his branch of production as commodities, which must therefore be bought. The material conditions of commodity production confront him to an ever greater extent as the products of other commodity producers, as commodities. The capitalist must appear to the same extent as a money capitalist. His capital must function in a greater measure as money capital. On the other hand, the same circumstance that produces the basic condition for capitalist production, the existence of a class of wage laborers, encourages the transition of all commodity production to capitalist commodity production. To the extent that the latter develops, 120 the metamorphoses of capital in their circuit, it has a destroying and dissolving effect on all earlier forms of production, which, being preeminently aimed at satisfying the direct needs of the producers, only transform their excess products into commodities. It makes the sale of the product the main interest, at first without apparently attacking the mode of production itself. This was for example the first effect of capitalist world trade on such peoples as the Chinese, Indians, Arabs, etc. Once it has taken root, however, it destroys all forms of commodity production that are based either on the producer's own labor, or simply on the sale of the excess product as a commodity. It firstly makes commodity production universal, and then gradually transforms all commodity production into capitalist production. 3. Whatever the social form of production, workers and means of production always remain its factors. But if they are in a state of mutual separation, they are only potentially factors of production. For any production to take place, they must be connected. The particular form and mode in which this connection is effected is what distinguishes the various economic epochs of the social structure. In the present case, the separation of the free worker from his means of production is the given starting point, and we have seen how and under what conditions the two come to be united in the hands of the capitalist, i.e. as his capital in its productive mode of existence. The actual process which the personal and material elements of commodity formation, brought together in this way, enter into with each other, the process of production, therefore itself becomes a function of capital, the capitalist production process, whose nature we have gone into in detail in the first volume of this work. All pursuit of commodity production becomes at the same time pursuit of the exploitation of labor power, but only capitalist commodity production is an epoch-making mode of exploitation, which in the course of its historical development revolutionizes the entire economic structure of society by its organization of the labor process, and its gigantic extension of technique, and towers incomparably above all earlier epochs. by the different roles that they play during the production process in connection with the formation of value, and thus in the creation of surplus value, means of production and labor power, insofar as they are forms of existence of the capital value advanced, are distinguished as constant and variable capital. They are further distinguished as 3. Up to here manuscript VII from here manuscript VI. The circuit of money capital 121 different components of productive capital, by the fact that the means of production, once in the possession of the capitalist, remain his capital even outside the production process, whereas labor power becomes the form of existence of an individual capital only within this process. If labor power is only a commodity in the hands of its seller, the wage laborer, it only becomes capital in the hands of its buyer, the capitalist, to whom falls its temporary use. The means of production, for their part, become objective forms of productive capital, or productive capital proper, only from the moment that labor power, as the personal form of existence of productive capital, can be incorporated into them. The means of production are no more capital by nature than is human labor power. They receive this specific social character only under certain particular conditions that have historically developed, just as it is only under such conditions that precious metals are stamped with the character of money, or money with that of money capital. In the course of its functioning, productive capital consumes its own components, to convert them into a mass of products of a higher value. Since labor power operates only as an organ of capital, the excess value with which surplus labor endows the product, over and above that of its constituent elements, is also the fruit of capital. Labor power's surplus labor is labor performed gratis for capital, and hence forms surplus value for the capitalist, a value that costs him no equivalent. The product is therefore not only a commodity, but a commodity impregnated with surplus value. Its value is P plus S, the value of the productive capita, P consumed in its production plus that of the surplus value S it engenders. Let us suppose that this commodity consists of 10,000 pounds of yarn, with means of production to the value of 372 pounds and labor power to the value of 50 pounds used up in its production. During the spinning process, the spinners transferred to the yarn the value of the means of production consumed in the process by means of their labor, 372 pounds, while they simultaneously produced a new value of, say, 128 pounds, corresponding to their expenditure of labor. The 10,000 lb of yarn is therefore the bearer of a value of 500 pounds. 3. Third stage. CM commodities become commodity capital as the functional form of existence of the already valorized capital value that has arisen directly from the production process itself. If commodity production were carried out on a capitalist basis throughout the whole society, then 122 the metamorphoses of capital in their circuit every commodity would be from the start the element of a commodity capital, whether it consisted of pig iron or Brussels lace, sulfuric acid or cigars. The problem as to which varieties out of the host of commodities are destined by their properties for the rank of capital, and which others for common commodity service, is one of the charming vexations that scholastic economics inflicts on itself. In commodity form, capital must perform commodity functions. The articles it consists of, which are produced from the start for the market, must be sold, transformed into money, and thus pass through the movement CM. The capitalist's commodity consists of 10,000 lb of cotton yam. If means of production to a value of 372 pounds were consumed in the spinning process, and a new value of 128 pounds created, then the yam has a value of 500 pounds, expressed in its corresponding price. This price is to be realized by the sale CM. What is it that makes this simple act of all commodity circulation simultaneously a function of capital? It cannot be a change undergone in the act itself, neither with respect to its useful character, for it is as an object of use that the commodity passes to the buyer, nor with respect to its value, for this does not suffer a change of magnitude, but only one of form. It first existed in yam, and now exists in money. There is thus an essential distinction between the first stage MC and the final stage CM. Formerly the money advanced functioned as money capital because it was converted through circulation into commodities with a specific use value. Now the commodity can function as capital only insofar as it actually brings this character with it from the production process, before its circulation begins. During the spinning process the spinners created yam to the value of 128 pounds, of which 50 pounds, say, was simply an equivalent to the capitalist for his outlay on labor power, and 78 pounds formed surplus value. A rate of exploitation of labor power of 156%. The value of the 10,000 lb of yam thus contains, firstly, the value of the consumed productive capital P, its constant part being 372 pounds, its variable part 50 pounds and their sum 422 pounds. Equals 8,440 lb of yarn. The value of the productive capital P is equal to C, the value of its formative elements, which in the stage MC confronted the capitalist as commodities in the hands of their sellers. Secondly, however, the value of the yam contains a surplus value of 78 pounds equals 1,560 lb of yarn. Thus as the value expression of the 10,000 lb of yam, C equals C plus L1C, C plus an increment, 78 pounds, which we shall call C, as it exists in the same commodity form as the original value now does. Asterisk. We have chosen to adhere here to the traditional English symbolism for Marx's categories, even at the risk of perpetuating a possible source of confusion. Since the circuit of money capital 123 the value of 10,000 lb of yam, 500 pounds, is thus C plus C equals C. What makes C? as the value expression of the 10,000 lb of yarn, into C, is not the absolute amount of its value, 500 pounds, for this is determined, like the value expression of any other sum of commodities, by the amount of labor objectified in it. It is rather the relative magnitude of its value compared with the value of the capital P consumed in its production. The value contained in it is this value plus the surplus value provided by the productive capital. Its value is greater, L. It exceeds the capital value P, by the surplus value C. The 10,000 lb of yarn is the bearer of a capital value which has been valorized, enriched with a surplus value, and this is because it is the product of the capitalist production process. C expresses a value ratio, the ratio of the value of the commodity product to that of the capital consumed in its production, i.e. it expresses the composition of its value out of capital value and surplus value. The 10,000 lb of yarn are commodity capital, C, only as the transformed form of the productive capital P, thus in a relationship that exists at first only in the circuit of this individual capital, or for the capitalist who has produced yarn with his capital. It is so to speak only an internal relation, not an external one, that makes the 10,000 lb of yarn, as bearer of value, into commodity capital. The yarn bears its capitalist birthmark not in the absolute magnitude of its value, but in its relative magnitude, in the magnitude of its value compared with the value of the productive capital contained in it before it was transformed into commodities. If the 10,000 lb of yam is sold at its value of 500 pounds, this act of circulation, considered in itself, is CM, the simple transformation of a value that remains the same from the commodity form into the money form. However, as a particular stage in the circuit of an individual capital, this same act is the realization of a capital value of 422 pounds plus a surplus value of 78 pounds, both borne by the commodity, Le. CM, the transformation of the capital value from its commodity form into the money form. 4. The function of C is now that of every commodity product, to be transformed into money and sold, to pass through the phase of circulation CM as long as the now valorized capital persists in the form of commodity capital, is tied up on the market. The production process C, M and P are used for the three forms of industrial capital in its circuit. C has to be used for the increment to C, i.e. the surplus value in its commodity form. However, C, V and S are conventionally used in English for constant capital, variable capital and surplus value, and this trio reappears later in volume 2. 4. Up to here manuscript V. From here manuscript V. 124 The metamorphoses of capital in their circuit stands still. The capital operates neither to fashion products nor to form value. According to the varying speed with which the capital sheds its commodity form and assumes its money form, i.e. according to the briskness of the sale, the same capital value will serve to a very uneven degree in the formation of products and value, and the scale of the reproduction will expand or contract. It was shown in the first volume that the degree of effectiveness of a given capital is conditioned by forces in the production process that are to a certain extent independent of its own magnitude. Asterisk. Now we see that the circulation process sets in motion new forces independent of the magnitude of value, which affect the degree of effectiveness of the capital, its expansion and its contraction. The mass of commodities C, as bearer of the valorized capital, must fully undergo the metamorphosis CM. The quantity sold is here the essential determinant. The individual commodity figures only as an integral part of the total quantity. The value of 500 pounds exists in 10,000 lb of yarn. If the capitalist succeeds in selling only 7,440 pounds, at its value of 372 pounds, then he has only replaced the value of his constant capital, the value of the means of production consumed. If he sells 8,440 pounds, then he still replaces only the value of the total capital advanced. He must sell more, if he is to realize surplus value, and he must sell the entire 10,000 lb of yarn if he is to realize the whole surplus value of 78 pounds, equals 1,560 lb of yarn. He receives in the 500 pounds only an equal value for the commodities sold. His transaction within the circulation sphere is simply CM. If he had paid his workers 64 pounds instead of 50 pounds, then his surplus value would be only 64 pounds, instead of 78 pounds, and the rate of exploitation only 100% instead of 156%. But the value of his yarn would be unchanged, only the ratio of its various component portions would be different. The Circulation Act MC would still be the sale of 10,000 lb of yarn for 500 pounds, its value. C equals C plus C, equals 422 pounds plus 78 pounds. C is equal in value to P or the productive capital, and this is also equal in value to the M advanced in MC, the purchase of the elements of production, in our example, 422 pounds. If the mass of commodities is sold at its value, then C equals 422 pounds, and C equals 78 pounds, the value of the surplus product of 1,560 lb of yarn. If we call C, expressed in monetary terms, M, we have C, M, or C plus C, M plus M, and the circuit MC. P. C, M, in its expanded form is thus M underscore C. L. P. C plus C, M plus M, MP. See Capital Volume 1, Chapter 24, 4, pp. 747 tf. The circuit of money capital 125. In the first stage, the capitalist withdraws articles of use, both from the commodity market proper and from the labor market. In the third stage he puts commodities back, though only into one market, the commodity market proper. But if he withdraws more value from the market by way of his commodities than he originally put into it, this is only because he puts in a greater value of commodities than he originally withdrew. He puts in the value M and withdraws the same value C. He puts in C plus C, and withdraws the same value M plus M. In our example, M was equal in value to 8,440 lb of yarn. The capitalist, however, puts 10,000 lb of yarn into the market, i.e. gives back a greater value than he took from it. On the other hand, he has only put in this increased value because he produced surplus value, as an aliquot part of the product, expressed in surplus product, in the production process, by the exploitation of labor power. It is only as the product of this process that the mass of commodities is commodity capital, the bearer of the valorized capital value. By accomplishing CM, the capital value advanced is realized together with the surplus value. The two were realized together in the sale, either by stages or at one stroke, of the total mass of commodities, expressed as CM. However, the same circulation process CM differs for the capital value and for the surplus value insofar as it expresses in each case a different stage of their circulation, a different section in the series of metamorphoses that they have to pass through within the circulation sphere. The surplus value, C, first came into the world within the production process. It is thus now entering the commodity market for the first time, and moreover in the commodity form. This is its first form of circulation, and hence the act CM is its first act of circulation or its first metamorphosis, which thus still has to be supplemented by the opposite circulation act, the converse metamorphosis M circa 5. It is a different matter with the circulation accomplished by the capital value C in the same circulation act CM, which for it is the circulation act CM, where C equals P, equal to the originally advanced M. This started its first act of circulation as M, money capital, and it now returns to the same form T of the act CM. It has thus passed through the two opposing phases of circulation, 1, MC and 2, CM, and exists once again in the form in which it can begin the same cyclical process afresh. The transformation from the commodity form to the money 5. This holds irrespective of the manner in which we divide up capital value and surplus value. 10,000 lb of yarn contain 1,560 lb equals 78 pounds surplus value, but 1 lb of yarn equals 1 shilling also contains 2.496 ounces, equals 1.872 d, surplus value. 126. The metamorphoses of capital in their circuit form, which is for the surplus value its first transformation, is for the capital value its return or transformation back into its original money form. The money capital was converted into a sum of commodities of equal value, L and MP, by way of M_CL. These commodities now no MP longer function as commodities, as articles for sale. Their value now exists in the hands of their buyer, the capitalist, as the value of his productive capital P, and in the function of P, productive consumption, they are transformed into a kind of commodity materially different from the means of production, into yarn, with the value not only being maintained, but increased, from 422 pounds to 500 pounds. Through this real metamorphosis, the commodities withdrawn from the market in the first stage MC are replaced by materially different commodities of different value, which must now Cetian as commodities, be transformed into money and sold. Hence the production process appears simply as an interruption in the circulation of capital value, which up till then has only passed through the first phase MC. It passes through the second and final phase, CM, with C altered both materially and in value. But as far as the capital value taken by itself is concerned, all it has undergone in the production process is a change in its use form, Jeb Rock's form. It existed as 422 pounds of value in land MP, and it now exists as 422 pounds, the value of 8,440 lb of yarn. Thus, if we simply consider the two phases of the circulation process of the capital value, separately from its surplus value, it passes through 1, MC and 2, CM, where the second C has a changed form, but the same value, as the first C. We thus have MCM, a form of circulation which, by way of a twofold displacement in opposite directions, the transformation of money into commodities and commodities into money, necessarily determines the return of the value advanced as money to its money form, its transformation back into money. The same act of circulation CM, which is the second and concluding metamorphosis for the capital value advanced in money, its return to the money form, is, for the surplus value that is simultaneously borne along by the COF. 1L11 O to T capital, and realized together with it when it is converted into the money form, its first metamorphosis, the transformation from the commodity form into the money form, CM, the first phase of circulation. Two things should be noted here. Firstly, the ultimate transformation of capital value back into its original money form as a function of com. The circuit of money capital 127 mod T capital. Secondly, this function includes the first formal transformation of the surplus value from its original commodity form into the money form. The money form plays a double role here. On the one hand, it is the returning form of a value originally advanced in money, i.e. the money returns to the form of value that opened the process. On the other hand, it is the first transformed form of a value that originally enters into circulation in the commodity form. If the commodities of which the commodity capital consists are sold at their value, as we assume here, then C plus C is transformed into M plus M with the same value. It is in this last form, M plus M, £422 plus £78 equals £500, that the raised commodity capital now exists in the hands of the capitalist. Capital value and surplus value now exist as money, i.e. in the form of the universal equivalent. At the end of the process, the capital value is thus once again in the same form in which it entered it, and can therefore open the process afresh and pass through it as money capital. And indeed, because the initial and concluding form of the process is that of money capital, M, we call this form of the circuit of money capital. It is not the form of the value advanced, but only its magnitude, that is changed at the end. M plus M is nothing more than a sum of money of a certain magnitude, in our case £500. But as the result of the circuit of capital, as realized commodity capital, this sum of money contains the capital value and the surplus value. Moreover, these are no longer inextricably entwined, as in the yarn. They are now simply juxtaposed. Their realization has given each of the two an independent money form. 211 250ths of the money is the capital value, £422, and 39 250ths the surplus value of £78. This separation effected by the realization of the commodity capital does not only have the formal content we shall speak of in a moment, it is important in the reproduction process of capital, according to whether M is added onto M in its entirety, in part, or not at all, thus according to whether or not it continues to function as a component of the capital value advanced. M and M can even pass through quite different circulations. In M, the capital returns once more to its original form M, its money form, but in a form in which it has been realized as capital. Firstly, there is a quantitative difference. It was M, £422, it is now M, £500, and this difference is expressed in M. M, the quantitatively different extremities of the circuit, the actual movement of which is indicated simply by the dots. M is greater than M. M minus M equals S, 128 the metamorphoses of capital in their circuit the surplus value. But all that exists as the result of the cycle M. M is M, the process of formation has been obliterated in the product. M now exists independently in its own right, it is independent of the movement that produced it. The movement is past, and M is there in its place. But as M plus M, £422 advanced capital plus an increment of £78 on the same, M, or £500 also exhibits a qualitative relation, although this qualitative relation itself exists only as a relation between the parts of a corresponding sum, i.e. as a quantitative ratio. M, the capital advanced, which is once again present in its original form, £422, exists now as realized capital. It has not only maintained itself, but it has also realized itself as capital, insofar as it has differentiated itself from M, £78, which I5 related to it as its increase, its fruit, an increment that it itself has bred. It is realized as capital, because it is value that has bred value. M exists as a capital relation. M no longer appears as mere money, but is expressly postulated as money capital, expressed as value that has valorized itself, i.e. thus also possesses the property of valorizing itself, of breeding more value than it itself has. M is posited as capital by its relation to another part of M, as to something posited by itself, as to the effect of which it is the cause, as to the consequence of which it is the ground. M thus appears as a sum of values which is internally differentiated, undergoes a functional, conceptual, self-differentiation, and expresses the capital relation. But this is expressed simply as a result, without the mediation of the process whose result it is. Portions of value are not qualitatively distinguished from each other as such, save in so far as they appear as the values of different articles, concrete things, thus in various different useful forms, as values of different bodies of commodities. A distinction that does not arise from their existence is mere portions of value. In money, every difference between commodities is obliterated, because money is precisely the equivalent form common to all of them. A sum of money of £500 consists of nothing but isomorphous elements of £1. Since the mediating effect of its history is obliterated in the simple existence of this sum of money, and every trace of the specific difference which the various component parts of capital possess in the production process has vanished, the only remaining distinction is the crude, non-conceptual. The word begrifflich, which appears here in the original, is clearly inappropriate, in view of the general sense of the passage. We have therefore assumed that Marx intended to write begrijslos. The circuit of money capital 129 distinction between a principal, as it is called in English, the capital of £422 which was advanced, and an additional sum of value of £78. Let M be £110, of which £100 is M, the principal, and £10 is S, surplus value. There is absolute homogeneity, a complete absence of conceptual distinction, between the two constituent parts of the sum of £110. Any £10 is always 1/11th of the total sum of £110, whether it is a tenth of the principal advanced, or the additional £10 over and above this. Principal and increment, capital and surplus, can therefore both be expressed as fractions of the total sum. In our example 10/11ths is the principal or capital, and 1/11th the surplus. At the conclusion of its process, the realized capital therefore appears as a sum of money, within which the distinction between principal and surplus expresses, in a naive, non-conceptual manner, the capital relation. This is also true, moreover, for C equals C plus C. But with the difference that C, in which C and C are simply proportional value portions of the same homogeneous mass of commodities, indicates its origin in P, whose direct product it is, whereas in M, a form arising directly from the circulation sphere, the direct connection with P has vanished. The superficial distinction between principal and increment that is contained in M, insofar as this expresses the result of the movement M. M vanishes immediately, as soon as M functions actively once more as money capital, rather than being fixed as the money expression of the valorized industrial capital. The circuit of money capital can never begin with M, but only with M, even though it is M, that now functions as M, i.e. never as an expression of the capital relation, but only as the form in which the capital value is advanced. As soon as the £500 is advanced afresh as capital, in order to be valorized once more, it is the starting point rather than the point of return. Instead of a capital of £422, one of £500 has no end been advanced. More money than before, more capital value, but the relation between the two components has gone. The sum of £500 now functions as capital, rather than £422, just as, originally, a sum of £500 might have functioned, rather than a sum of £422. It is not the active function of money capital to present itself as M, its own presentation as M, as rather a function of C, already in simple commodity circulation, 1, C1M, 2, MC2. M functions actively only in the second act MC2, its presentation as M is only the result of the first act, by virtue of which it first appears as the transformed form of the capital relation contained in M. The connection between one of its parts is a part of capital value and the other is the value increment 130. The metamorphoses of capital in their circuit to this does receive a functional significance, however, insofar as M divides into two circulations, the circulation of capital and the circulation of surplus value, when the circuit M is constantly repeated. The two parts M and M then fulfill functions that differ not just quantitatively, but also qualitatively. Considered in itself, however, the form M does not include the consumption of the capitalist, but expressly only capital's self-valorization and accumulation, insofar as the latter is first expressed in the periodic growth of the money capital that is constantly advanced afresh. Although it is a crude and conceptually undifferentiated form of capital, M equals M plus M is at the same time money capital in its first realized form, money that has bred money. This must be distinguished from the function of money capital in the first stage M_CL. In this MP first stage, M circulates as money. It functions as money capital simply because it is only in its monetary state that it performs a monetary function, and can be converted into the elements of P that face it as commodities, land MP. In this act of circulation, it functions only as money, but because this act is the first stage of capital value in process, it is simultaneously a function of money capital, by virtue of the specific useful form of the commodities land MP that are bought. M, on the other hand, composed of M, the capital value, and M, the surplus value created by it, expresses valorized capital value, the purpose and the result, the function of the total process of the circuit of capital. If it expresses this result in money form, as realized money capital, this is not because it is the money form of capital, money capital, but rather the reverse, because it is money capital, capital in the money form, and that it was in this form that capital opened the process, was advanced in its money form. The transformation back into the money form is a function of the commodity capital C, as we saw, not of money capital. And as far as the difference M between M and M is concerned, this is only the money form of C, the increment to C, may is only equal to M plus M because C equals C plus C.1 NC. Therefore, this difference, and TBE relation between the capital value and the surplus value bred by it, is present and is expressed before they are both transformed into M, into a sum of money in which the two portions of value confront each other from a position of independence and can therefore also be applied to independent and different functions. May is only the result of the realization of C. Both of these, C, as well as M, are only different forms, the commodity form and the money. The circuit of money capital 131 form, of the valorized capital value. Both have it in common that they are valorized capital value. Both are realized capital, because here capital value exists as such together with surplus value as the fruit that is separate from it but produced by it, although this relation is expressed only in the naive form of the ratio between two parts of a sum of money or commodity value. As expressions of capital, however, both related to and distinct from the surplus value created by it, i.e. as expressions of valorized value, M and C, are the same, and express the same thing, only in different forms. They are not distinguished from each other as money capital and commodity capital, but rather as money and commodity. Insofar as they represent valorized value, capital active as capital, they simply express the result of the function of productive capital, the only function in which capital value breeds value. What they have in common is that both of them, money capital and commodity capital, are modes of existence of capital. The one is capital in its money form, the other in its commodity form. The specific functions that distinguish them can thus be nothing other than distinctions between the money function and the commodity function. The commodity capital, as the direct product of the capitalist production process, recalls its origin and is therefore more rational in its form, less lacking in conceptual differentiation, than the money capital, in which every trace of this process has been effaced, just as all the particular useful forms of commodities are generally effaced in money. Hence it is only when M itself functions as commodity capital, when it is the direct product of a production process and not the transformed form of this product, that its bizarre form disappears. I.e., in the production of the money material itself. The formula for the production of gold, for example, would be MC. P. M plus M. Where M figures as MP the commodity product insofar as P provides more gold than was advanced for the elements of production of gold in the first M, the money capital. The expression M plus M, as irrational, in that, within it, part of a sum of money appears as the mother of another part of the same sum of money. But here this irrationality disappears. For the circuit as a whole, we have seen how the circulation process, after its first phase M_CL. MP has elapsed, is interrupted by P, in which the commodities bought on 132 the metamorphoses of capital and their circuit the market, land MP, are consumed as material and value components of the productive capital. The product of this consumption is a new commodity, M, altered both materially and in value. The interrupted circulation process, MC, must be supplemented by CM, but it is C that appears as the bearer of this second and concluding phase, a commodity different materially and in value from the original C. The circulation series thus presents itself as 1, MC1, 2, C2M, in which the first commodity C1 has been replaced in the second phase by one of higher value and a different useful form, C2, during the interruption that is occasioned by the function of P, L. The production of C, from the elements of C, the forms of existence of the productive capital P. The first form of appearance in which we met with capital, on the other hand, Volume 1, Chapter 4, MCM, broken down, 1, MC1, 2, C1M, exhibits the same commodity twice over. It is the same commodity into which money is transformed in the first phase and which is transformed back into more money in the second phase. Despite this essential difference, both circulations have in common that in their first phase money is transformed into commodities and in their second phase commodities into money, that the money that is spent in the first phase flows back again in the second. On the one hand, they have in common this stream of money back to its starting point, on the other hand, the excess of the money that flows back over that advanced. In this respect, CM 2 appears to be contained in the general formula MCM. It further results here that in both metamorphoses pertaining to the circulation sphere, MC and CM, equally large and simultaneously present values always confront and replace each other. The change in value belongs solely to the metamorphosis P, the production process, which thus appears as the real metamorphosis of capital, as opposed to the merely formal metamorphosis of the circulation sphere. Let us now consider the total movement MC, P, CM, or its expanded form M_CL. P, C plus C, M plus M. Here capital MP appears as a value that passes through a sequence of connected and mutually determined transformations, a series of metamorphoses that form so many phases or stages of a total process. Two of these phases belong to the circulation sphere, one to the sphere of production. In each of these phases the capital value is to be found in a different form, corresponding to a different and special function. Within this movement the value advanced not only maintains itself, but it grows, increases. The circuit of money capital 133 its magnitude. Finally, in the concluding stage, it returns to the same form in which it appeared at the outset of the total process. This total process is therefore a circuit. The two forms that the capital value assumes within its circulation stages are those of money capital and commodity capital. The form pertaining to the production stage is that of productive capital. The capital that assumes these forms in the course of its total circuit, discards them again and fulfills in each of them its appropriate function, is industrial. Industrial here in the sense that it encompasses every branch of production that is pursued on a capitalist basis. Money capital, commodity capital and productive capital thus do not denote independent varieties of capital, whose functions constitute the content of branches of business that are independent and separate from one another. They are simply particular functional forms of industrial capital, which takes on all three forms in turn. The circuit of capital proceeds normally only as long as its various phases pass into each other without delay. If capital comes to a standstill in the first phase, MC, money capital forms into a hoard. If this happens in the production phase, the means of production cease to function, and labor power remains unoccupied. If in the last phase, CM, unsaleable stocks of commodities obstruct the flow of circulation. It lies in the nature of the case, however, that the circuit itself determines that capital is tied up for certain intervals in the particular sections of the cycle. In each of its phases industrial capital is tied to a specific form, as money capital, productive capital or commodity capital. Only after it has fulfilled the function corresponding to the particular form it is in does it receive the form in which it can enter a new phase of transformation. In order to make this clear, we have assumed in our example that the capital value of the mass of commodities created in the production stage is equal to the total value originally advanced as money. In other words, that the whole capital value advanced as money moves all at once from one stage into the subsequent one. We have already seen, however, Volume 1, Chapter 8, that a part of the constant capital, the actual instruments of labor, e.g. machines, serve continuously throughout a greater or smaller number of repetitions of the same production process, and for this reason give up their value to the product only bit by bit. We shall show later on how far this circumstance modifies the circuit of capital. The following will suffice for the time being. In our example, the value of the productive capital, £422, 134. The metamorphoses of capital in their circuit contained only the average calculated wear and tear of factory buildings, machinery, etc., thus only the portion of value that they carry over in the course of transforming 10,000 lb of raw cotton into 10,000 lb of yarn, the product of a weekly spinning process of 60 hours. The instruments of labor, buildings, machinery, etc. therefore figured in the means of production into which the constant capital advanced was transformed, as if they were simply hired on the market in return for a weekly payment. This, however, alters absolutely nothing as far as the substance of the matter is concerned. We need only multiply the weekly output of yarn, 10,000 lb, by the number of weeks contained in a given series of years, and the entire value of the instruments of labor bought and used up in this period will have been carried over. It is clear then that the money capital advanced must first be transformed into these means of production, and must therefore have made its exit from the first phase MC, before it can function as productive capital P. It is just as clear in our example that the capital value of £422, which is incorporated into the YAM during the production process, cannot enter into the circulation phase CM, as a component of the 10,000 lb of yarn before the process is finished. The yarn cannot be sold until it has been spun. In the general formula, the product of P is considered as a material thing different from the elements of the productive capital, an object that has an existence of its own, apart from the production process, possessing a useful form different from that of the elements of product Tion. In so far as the result of the production process does appear as a thing, this is always the case, even when a part of the product enters once more as an element into the renewed production process. Thus grain serves as seed corn for its own production, but the product consists only of grain, and thus has a different physical shape from the elements applied together with it: labor power, instruments of labor, fertilizer. There are however particular branches of industry in which the product of the production process is not a new objective product, a commodity. The only one of these that is economically important is the communication industry, both the transport industry proper, for moving commodities and people, and the transmission of mere information letters, telegrams, etc. Chuprov says on this point, the manufacturer can produce articles first and look for customers afterwards. His product, after it is ejected in finished form from the production process, passes into circulation as a commodity separate. The circuit of money capital 135 from this process. Production and consumption thus appear as two acts separated in time and space. In the transport industry, however, which does not create new products, but only displaces people and things, these two acts coincide. The services, the change of place, are necessarily consumed the moment they are produced. This is why the area within which railways can seek their customers is at most 50 versts, 53 lan, on either side. 6. The result in each case, whether it is people or commodities that are transported, is a change in their spatial location, e.g. that the yarn finds itself in India instead of in England, where it was produced. But what the transport industry sells is the actual change of place itself. The useful effect produced is inseparably connected with the transport process, the production process specific to the transport industry. People and commodities travel together with the means of transport, and this journeying, the spatial movement of the means of transport, is precisely the production process accomplished by the transport industry. The useful effect can only be consumed during the production process. It does not exist as a thing of use distinct from this process, a thing which functions as an article of commerce and circulates as a commodity only after its production. However, the exchange value of this useful effect is still determined, like that of any other commodity, by the value of the elements of production used up in it, labor power and means of production, plus the surplus value created by the surplus labor of the workers occupied in the transport industry. In respect of its consumption, too, this useful effect behaves just like other commodities. If it is consumed individually, then its value vanishes with its consumption. If it is consumed productively, so that it is itself a stage of production of the commodity that finds itself transported, then its value is carried over to the commodity as an addition to it. The formula for the transport industry is thus M_CL. P. M, for it is the MP production process itself, and not a product separable from it, that is paid for and consumed. This therefore has almost exactly the same form as that for the production of precious metals, except that M, as here the transformed form of the useful effect produced in the course of the production process, and not the natural form of the gold and silver that is produced during this process and ejected from it. Industrial capital is the only mode of existence of capital in which not 6. Chuprov, Zalieznotorozhnoi Kozyusvo, the Railway l'Industrie, Moscow, 1875, pp. 69, 70. 136. The metamorphoses of capital in their circuit. Only the appropriation of surplus value or surplus product, but also its creation, is a function of capital. It thus requires production to be capitalist in character. Its existence includes that of the class antagonism between capitalists and wage laborers. To the degree that it takes hold of production, the technique and social organization of the labor process are revolutionized, and the economic historical type of society along with this. The other varieties of capital which appeared previously, within past or declining conditions of social production, are not only subordinated to it and correspondingly altered in the mechanism of their functioning, but they now move only on its basis, thus live and die, stand and fall together with this basis. Money capital and commodity capital, insofar as they appear and function as bearers of their own peculiar branches of business alongside industrial capital, are now only modes of existence of the various functional forms that industrial capital constantly assumes and discards within the circulation sphere, forms which have been rendered independent and one-sidedly extended through the social division of labor. On the one hand, the circuit M. as inextricably linked with the general circulation of commodities, issues from it and flows back into it, forming a part of it. On the other hand, it forms for the individual capitalist an independent movement peculiar to his capital value, a movement which proceeds in part within the general circulation of commodities, in part outside it, but which always retains its independent character. It does so firstly because both of the phases that it goes through in the circulation sphere, MC and CM, possess a functionally specific character as phases of the movement of capital. In MC, C is determined in its material content as labor power and means of production. In CM, the capital value is realized together with the surplus value. In the second place, P, the production process, includes productive consumption. Thirdly, the return of money to its starting point makes the movement M. A cyclical movement complete in itself. On the one hand, therefore, each individual capital, in the two halves of its circulation MC and CM, is an agent of the general circulation of commodities, in which it functions and of which it forms a link, either as money or as commodity. Hence it is a member of the general series of metamorphoses of the commodity world. On the other hand, it describes its own independent circuit within the general circulation, one in which the sphere of production forms a transitional stage, and in which it returns to its starting point in the same form in which it left it. Within its own circuit, which includes its metamorphosis in the circuit of money capital 137 production process, the magnitude of its value also changes. It returns not only as money value, but as increased and expanded money value. If we finally consider MC, P, CM, as a special form of the circuit of capital, alongside the other forms that will be investigated later on, it is marked by the following features. 1. It appears as the circuit of money capital because industrial capital in its money form, as money capital, forms the starting point and the point of return of the whole process. The formula itself expresses that the money is not spent here as money, but is only advanced, and is thus simply the money form of capital, money capital. It further expresses the fact that it is the exchange value, not the use value, that is the decisive inherent purpose of the movement. It is precisely because the money form of value is its independent and palpable form of appearance that the circulation form M, which starts and finishes with actual money, expresses money-making, the driving motive of capitalist production, most palpably. The production process appears simply as an unavoidable middle term, a necessary evil for the purpose of money-making. This explains why all nations characterized by the capitalist mode of production are periodically seized by fits of giddiness in which they try to accomplish the money-making without the mediation of the production process. * 2. In this circuit, the stage of production, the function of P, forms an interruption in the circulation process MC. CM, whose two phases are in turn only a mediation of simple circulation MCM. The production process here appears formally and explicitly, in the actual form of the circuit itself, for what it actually is in the capitalist mode of production, a mere means for the valorization of the value advanced, i.e. enrichment as such appears as the inherent purpose of production. 3. Because the sequence of phases is opened by MC, CM is the second term in the circulation. The starting point is M, the money capital to be valorized, the conclusion M, the valorized money capital M plus M, in which M figures alongside its offshoot M is realized capital. This distinguishes the circuit of money capital from the two other circuits P and C, and in two ways. On the one hand, through the money form of the two extremes, money is the independent and palpable form of existence of value, the value of the product in its independent value form, in which all trace of the commodity's use value has been effaced. On the other hand, the form P. P does not necessarily become P. The sentence in parentheses was introduced by Engels in the second, 1893, edition. 138 The metamorphoses of capital in their circuit P plus P, while in the form C. C. No value difference at all is visible between the two extremes. It is thus characteristic of the formula M. M, on the one hand, that the capital value forms the starting point and the valorized capital the point of return, so that the advancing of the capital value appears as the means, the valorized capital value is the goal of the whole operation. On the other hand, that this relation is expressed in the money form, the independent value form, hence money capital is money breeding money. The creation by value of surplus value is not only expressed as the alpha and omega of the process, but explicitly presented in the glittering money form. 4. Since M, the money capital realized as the result of CM, the complementary and concluding phase of MC, exists in absolutely the same form as that in which it opened its first circuit. It can, as it emerges from this, reopen the same circuit as augmented, accumulated, money capital, M, equals M plus M. At least it is in no way expressed in the form of M. M. That the circulation of M separates itself from that of M when the circuit is repeated. Considered by itself in isolation, from the formal standpoint, the circuit of money capital thus expresses only the process of valorization and accumulation. Consumption, therefore, is expressed in it only as productive consumption, M_C. L. This is all that is MP accounted for in this circuit of the individual capital. ML is LM or CM from the point of view of the worker, i.e. the first phase of the circulation that mediates his individual consumption, LMC, means of subsistence. The second phase, MC, no longer falls within the circuit of the individual capital, but it is introduced by it and presupposed by it, for the worker, in order to continue to exist on the market as exploitable material for the capitalist, must before all else keep alive, and therefore maintain himself by individual consumption. This consumption itself, however, is assumed here only as a precondition for the productive consumption of labor power by capital, thus only insofar as the worker maintains and reproduces himself as labor power by his individual consumption. The means of production, MP, however, the actual commodities that are involved in the circuit, are simply the means of nourishment for productive consumption. The act LM mediates the individual consumption of the worker, the transformation of means of subsistence into his flesh and blood. But the capitalist must also exist, thus also live and consume, in order to function as capitalist. In actual fact, he needs to consume only as a worker, and hence no more than this is assumed in this form of the circulation process. But the circuit of money capital 139, even this is not expressed formally, since the formula closes with M, i.e. a result that can function again immediately as increased money capital. CM directly contains the sale of C, but CM, which is from one side a sale, is MC, a purchase, from the other side, and in the last instance commodities are bought only for the sake of their use value. We ignore intermediate transactions here, in order to enter the process of consumption, either individual or productive, according to the nature of the article bought. This consumption, however, does not enter the circuit of the individual capital of which C is the product. The product C is precisely ejected from the circuit as a commodity to be sold. It is expressly destined for the consumption of others. We therefore find among the exponents of the mercantile system, which is based on the formula MCP. CM. Long sermons to the effect that the individual capitalist should consume only in his capacity as a worker, and that a capitalist nation should leave the consumption of its commodities and the consumption process in general to other more stupid nations, while making productive consumption into its own life's work. These sermons are often reminiscent in both form and content of analogous ascetic exhortations by the fathers of the Church. The circuit of capital is thus a unified process of circulation and production. It includes both. In so far as the two phases MC and CM are processes of circulation, the circulation of capital forms part of the general circulation of commodities. But by taking part in functionally determined sections or stages in the circuit of capital, which do not just pertain to the sphere of circulation, but also to that of production, capital performs its own circuit within the general circulation of commodities. This general circulation enables it, in the first stage, to assume the form in which it can function as productive capital, in the second stage, to cast off the commodity function in which it cannot renew its circuit. It equally gives it the possibility of separating its own capital circuit from the circulation of the surplus value that has adhered to it. Marx did not leave a systematic examination of the mercantile system as he conceived it, although he devotes a few paragraphs to it in a contribution to the Critique of Political Economy, London, 1971, pp. 157-9. The view he attributes to the mercantilists is expressed clearly by D'Avenant in an essay on the East India Trade, London, 1697, quoted by Marx in Theories of Surplus Value, Part 1. Page 179-6. By what is consumed at home, one loseth only what another gets, and the nation in general is not at all the richer. But all foreign consumption is a clear and toin profit. Single quote. 140. The metamorphoses of capital and their circuit. The circuit of money capital is thus the most one-sided, hence most striking and characteristic form of appearance of the circuit of industrial capital, in which its aim and driving motive, the valorization of value, money-making and accumulation, appears in a form that leaps to the eye, buying in order to sell dearer. The fact that the first phase is MC displays the provenance of the components of productive capital on the commodity market. It also shows that the capitalist production process is conditioned by circulation, trade. The circuit of money capital is not just commodity production, it only comes into being by way of circulation, and presupposes this. This is already shown by the fact that the form M pertaining to circulation appears as the first and pure form of the capital value advanced, which is not the case with the two other forms of the circuit. The circuit of money capital remains the permanent general express scion of industrial capital, insofar as it always includes the valorization of the value advanced. In P. The money expression of the capital emerges only as the price of the elements of production, thus only as value expressed in money of account, the form in which it is found in bookkeeping. M. M becomes a particular form of the circuit of industrial capital insofar as newly appearing capital is first advanced as money and is withdrawn in the same form, whether on its transfer from one branch of business to another, or when industrial capital is withdrawn from business altogether. This includes the capital function of the surplus value first advanced in the money form, and emerges most strikingly when this functions in a business other than that from which it originates. M. M can be the first circuit of a capital, it can be its last, it can be taken as the form of the total social capital. It is the form of capital that is newly invested, whether as newly accumulated capital in the money form, or old capital that is completely transformed into money in order to be transferred from one branch of production to another. As a form that is comprised in all circuits, money capital performs this circuit precisely for that part of the capital that creates surplus value, the variable capital. The normal form of advance for wages is payment in money. This process must be steadily repeated at short intervals, as the worker lives from hand to mouth. Hence the worker must constantly come face to face with the capitalist as money capitalist, and with his capital as money capital. Here there can be no question, as in the purchase of means of production and the sale of productive com. The circuit of money capital 141 moieties, of a direct or indirect balancing of accounts, so that the greater part of money capital actually figures only in the form of commodities, money only in the form of money of account, and finally cash only for the settlement of the balances. On the other hand, a part of the surplus value arising from the variable capital is spent by the capitalist for his personal consumption. This pertains to the retail trade, and, after however roundabout a journey, is ultimately spent as cash, in the money form of the surplus value. Whether this part of the surplus value is great or small in no way affects the matter. The variable capital constantly appears anew as money capital invested in wages, ML, and M as surplus value that is spent to defray the personal needs of the capitalist. Thus both M, as the variable capit D value advanced, and M, as its increment, are necessarily retain one jail the money form, to be spent as such. The formula MC, P, C, M, with the result M, equals M plus M, contains in its form a certain deception. It bears an illusory character that derives from the existence of the advanced and valorized value in its equivalent form, in money. What is emphasized is not the valorization of the value, but the money form of this process, the fact that more value in the money form is finally withdrawn from the circulation sphere than was originally advanced to it, the increase in the mass of gold and silver belonging to the capitalist. The so-called monetary system is simply the expression of the superficial form MCM, a movement that proceeds exclusively in the circulation sphere, and hence can only explain the two acts, 1, MC and 2, CM, by saying that C in the second act is sold above its value, and therefore withdraws more money from the circulation sphere than was cast into it by its purchase. On the other hand, however, MC, P, C, M, when regarded as the exclusive form, is the basis for the more developed mercantile system, in which it is not simply the circulation of commodities but also their production that appears as a necessary element. The illusory character of MC, P, C, M, and the corresponding the monetary system, sometimes called bullionism, preceded the mercantile system or mercantilism. Marx describes the mercantile system as a variant of the monetary system. He distinguishes the two most clearly in the Grundriss, Pelican edition, page 327. The monetary system had understood the autonomy of value only in the form in which it arose from simple circulation. Money. Then came the mercantile system, an epoch where industrial capital and hence wage labor arose in manufactures. The mercantilists already have faint notions of money as capital, but actually again only in the form of money, of the circulation of mercantile capital. 142 The metamorphoses of capital and their circuit illusory significance it is given, is there as soon as this form is regarded as the sole form, not as one that flows and is constantly repeated. As soon as it is taken not just as one of the forms of the circuit, but rather as its exclusive form. 142 The metamorphoses of capital and their circuit illusory significance it is given, is there as soon as this form is regarded as the sole form, not as one that flows and is constantly repeated. As soon as it is taken not just as one of the forms of the circuit, but rather as its exclusive form. In itself, however, it refers to other forms. Firstly, this whole circuit presupposes the capitalist character of the production process, and hence this production process itself is a basis, as well as the specific social relations determined by it. MC equals M_CL, but ML implies that the wage laborer, and their MP for the means of production too, are part of the productive capital. Hence the labor and valorization process, the production process is already a function of capital. Secondly, if M is repeated, the return to the money form appears just as evanescent as the money form in the first stage. MC vanishes, in order to make way for P. The permanently repeated advance in money, as well as its permanent return in money, themselves appear simply as evanescent moments in the circuit. Thirdly, R \MC P C M MC P C M MC P etc. Closing parenthesis. With the second repetition of the circuit, we already have the circuit P C M MC P, before the second circuit of M is even complete, and thus all further circuits can be considered in the form P. C, MC. P. MC, therefore, as the first phase of the first circuit, simply forms an evanescent prelude to the constantly repeated circuit of productive capital, as is in fact the case when industrial capital is invested for the first time, in the form of money capital. Furthermore, before the second circuit is complete, the first circuit MC. P. C, abbreviated C. C, has been described, the circuit of COI 111 Vaditi capital. Thus the first form already contains the two others, and the money form vanishes, insofar as it is not just an expression of value, but an expression of value in the equivalent form, in money. Finally, if we take a newly appearing individual capital, which describes the circuit MC. P. CM, for the first time, then MC is a preparatory phase, the precursor of the first production process performed by this individual capital. This phase MC is therefore not the presupposition, but is rather posited or conditioned by the production process. However, this holds only for this individual capital. The circuit of money capital 143 general form of the circuit of industrial capital is the circuit of money capita, insofar as the capitalist mode of production is presupposed, within a specific state of society determined by capitalist production. Hence the capitalist production process is the basic precondition, it is prior to or else, if not within the first circuit of the money capital of a newly invested industrial capital, then outside it. The continued existence of this production process assumes the constantly repeated circuit of PP. This assumption is already made within the first stage M_CL. Insofar as this stage presupposes on the one hand the MP existence of the class of wage laborers, and on the other hand what is the first stage MC for the purchaser of the means of production, and CM, for their seher. It presupposes, therefore, that C as commodity capital, and therefore that the commodity itself is the result of capitalist production. With this we must also presuppose the function of productive capital. Chapter 2. The circuit of productive capital. The circuit of productive capital has the general formula, P. CMC. P. It signifies the periodically repeated function of the productive capital, i.e. reproduction. In other words, it signifies that its production process is a reproduction process in respect of valorization. Not only does production occur, but also the periodic reproduction of surplus value. It signifies that the function of the industrial capital that exists in its productive form does not take place once and for all, but is periodically repeated, so that the new beginning is given by the point of departure itself. A part of C, in certain cases, in the investment branches of industrial capital, may directly re-enter, as means of production, the same labor process from which it emerged as a commodity. All this does is circumvent the need to transform its value into real money or money tokens. In other words, the only independent expression it receives is as money of account. This part of the value does not enter the circulation process. The same holds for the part of C that the capitalist consumes in kind, as part of the surplus product. This is however insignificant for capitalist production, at most it comes into consideration in agriculture. Two things about this form immediately catch the eye. Firstly, while in the first form, M, the production process, the function of P, the circulation of money capital and appears only as mediator between its two phases MC and CM. Here the entire circulation process of industrial capital, its whole movement within the circulation phase, merely forms an interruption, and hence a mediation, between the productive capital that opens the circuit as the first extreme and closes it in the same form as the last extreme, in the form of its new beginning. Circulation proper appears only as the mediator of the reproduction that is periodically repeated and made continuous through this repetition. The circuit of productive capital 145. Secondly, the entire circulation presents itself in the opposite form from that which it possessed in the circuit of money capital. There it was MCM, MCCM, disregarding the value determination. Here, again disregarding the value determination, it is CMC, CMMC, i.e. the form of simple commodity circulation. Simple reproduction. Let us consider first of all the process CMC that runs its course between the extremes P. P in the sphere of circulation. The starting point of this circulation is the commodity capital, C equals C plus C equals P plus C. The function of the commodity capital CM, the realization of the capital value P contained in it, which now exists as a commodity component C, as well as of the surplus value it contains, which exists as a component of the same commodity mass with the value C, was treated in the first form of the circuit. There, however, it formed the second phase of the interrupted circulation, and the concluding phase of the entire circuit. Here it forms the second phase of the circuit, but only the first phase of circulation. The first circuit ends with M, and since M, just as much as the original M, can reopen the second circuit as money capital, it was at first unnecessary to see whether the M and M, surplus value, contained in M, continue their paths together, or whether they describe different paths. This would only have been necessary if we had pursued the first circuit further, in its repetition. But in the circuit of productive capital this point must be decided, since the very definition of the first circuit depends on it, and because CM appears in it as the first phase of circulation, which is to be supplemented by MC. It depends on this decision whether the formula depicts simple reproduction or reproduction on an expanded scale. The character of the circuit is altered according to this decision. Let us therefore start by taking the simple reproduction of the productive capital, in which connection we assume, as in the first chapter, that other circumstances remain the same and that commodities are bought and sold at their values. On this assumption, the entire surplus value goes into the personal consumption of the capitalist. As soon as the commodity capital C has been transformed into money, the part of the money that represents the capital value goes on circulating in the circuit of industrial capital. The other part, which is surplus value turned into gold, goes into the general circulation of commodities. It is 146 the metamorphosis of capital and their circuit money circulation proceeding from the capitalist, but it takes place outside the circulation of his individual capital. In our example, we had a commodity capital C of 10,000 lb of yarn to the value of 500 pounds. 422 pounds of this was the value of the productive capital, and continues the capital circulation begun with C, as the money form of 8,440 lb of yarn, while the surplus value of 78 pounds, the money form of 1,560 lb of yarn, the excess portion of the commodity product, makes its exit from this circulation and describes a separate path within the general circulation of commodities. C. M_C, LC. MP. MC is a 0.3 rise of purchases made with the money that the capitalist spends, whether on commodities as such or on services, for his esteemed self and family. These purchases are fragmented, and take place at different times. The money thus exists temporarily in the form of a money reserve or hoard destined for current consumption, since it is in the form of a hoard that any money whose circulation is interrupted exists. In its function as a means of circulation, which also includes its temporary form of a hoard, it does not enter into the circulation of the capital in its money form. The money is not advanced, but spent. We have assumed that the total capital advanced is constantly passing from one of its phases into another, and that here, therefore, the commodity product of P carries the total value of the productive capital P, 422 pounds, plus the surplus value created during the production process, 78 pounds. In our example, where we are concerned with a discrete commodity product, the surplus value exists in the form of 1,560 lb of yarn, just as it exists as 2.496 ounces in each lb of yarn. If, however, the commodity product was a machine worth 500 pounds, for example, and with the same value composition, then there would certainly still be a portion of the machine's value that equaled the 78 pounds surplus value, but this 78 pounds would exist only in the total machine. This could not be divided into capital value and surplus value without being broken into pieces and thus destroying its value together with its use value. The two value components could thus be depicted only ideally as components of the physical body of the commodity, not as independent elements of the commodity C, in the way that each lb of yarn can be depicted as a separate, independent commodity element of the 10,000 pounds. In the one case, the total commodity, the circuit of productive capital 147 or commodity capital, the machine, must be sold in its entirety before M can embark on its own particular circulation. But if the capitalist sells 8,440 lb of yarn, in the other case, then the sale of the remaining 1,560 lb exhibits a completely separate circulation of the surplus value in the form C, 1,560 lb of yarn, M, 78 pounds, circa, Articles O, consumption. The value elements of each individual portion of the yarn product of 10,000 pounds, moreover, can be depicted as parts of the product just as much as the total product can. Just as the 10,000 lb of yarn can be partitioned into constant capital value, C, 7,440 lb of yarn with a value of 372 pounds, variable capital value, V, 1,000 lb of yarn with a value of 50 pounds, and surplus value, S, 1,560 lb of yarn with a value of 78 pounds, so each lb of yarn can be partitioned into C, 11.904 ounces with a value of 8.298 d, V, 1.600 ounces with a value of 1.200 d, and S, 2.496 ounces of yarn with a value of 1.872 d. The capitalist can therefore successively consume the elements of surplus value contained in the 10,000 lb of yarn by its successive sale in successive portions, and also successively realize the sum of C plus V in this way. That this operation similarly presupposes that the entire 10,000 lb is sold, and that the value of C and V is therefore replaced by the sale of 8,440 pounds. Volume 1, Chapter 9, 2. However, this might be, by way of C, M. Both the capital value and the surplus value contained in C acquire a separable existence, the existence of different sums of money. Both M and M are in each case actually the transformed form of the value that origina by possessed its own expression merely as the price of the commodity, L. A merely ideal expression. CMC is simple commodity circulation, the first phase of which, CM, is included in the circulation of the commodity capital C, M, and therefore in the circuit of capital. Its complementary phase MC, on the other hand, falls outside this circuit, as a separate process of general commodity circulation. The circulation of C and C, capital value and surplus value, divides after the transformation of C into M. It follows from this, firstly, that when the commodity capital is realized by way of CM, i.e., C, M plus M. The movement of capital value and surplus value which, in C, M, was still common to both, and was borne by the same mass of commodities, becomes divisible, as the two now possess independent forms as sums of money. Secondly, if this division takes place, with M being spent by the C above, page 122, note 148, the metamorphosis of capital in their circuit capitalist is revenue, while M continues the path prescribed for it by the circuit as the functional form of capital value. The first act C, M, together with the subsequent acts MC and MC, can be depicted as two different circulations, CMC and CMC. Both of these, in their general form, are series that belong to the ordinary commodities circulation. Moreover, it happens in practice that where commodities are continuous in their physical composition, and hence indivisible, the value components are isolated ideally. In the London building trade, for example, which is conducted for the most part on credit, the contractor receives advances in various stages as the building of the house progresses. None of these stages is a house. Each of them is rather a really existing component of a future house that is coming into being. Despite its reality, it is thus only an ideal fraction of the whole house, but it is sufficiently real, and the same, to serve as security for an additional advance. For more on this subject, see Chapter 12 below. Thirdly, if the common movement of capital value and surplus value in C and M only divides in part, so that a part of the surplus value is not spent as revenue, or not at all, then a change in capital value takes place within the circuit of the capital value itself, before the circuit is completed. In our example, the value of the productive capital was £422. If MC continues as £480, for example, or £500, then it traverses the final stages of the circuit as a value £58 or £78 greater than it originally was. This can also occur in combination with a change in its value composition. CM, the second stage of circulation and the concluding stage of circuit I, M. M is the second stage of the present circuit and the first stage of commodity circulation in it. In so far as circulation comes into consideration, it must thus be supplemented by MC. However, MC does not just have the process of valorization already behind it, in this case the function of P, the first stage, but its result, the commodity product C, has already been realized. The valorization of capital, as well as the realization of the commodity product in which the valorized capital value is represented, thus ends with CM. We have assumed simple reproduction, i.e. that MC completely separates off from MC since both circulations, CMC and CMC, belong in their general form to commodity circulation, and thus do not exhibit any difference in value between their extremes. It is quite easy to conceive the capitalist production process, as the vulgar economists do. See above, page 101, note. The circuit of productive capital 149 is the simple production of commodities, use values destined for consumption of some kind or other, which the capitalist produced only in order to replace them with commodities of a different use value, or to exchange them with these, as vulgar economics incorrectly puts it. C appears from the start as commodity capital, and the aim of the entire process, enrichment, valorization, by no means excludes a growth in the capitalist's consumption in line with the increase in the magnitude of surplus value. In fact, it absolutely includes it. In the circulation of the capitalist's revenue, the commodity which has been produced, C, or the corresponding ideal fraction of the commodity product C, serves in point of fact only to convert this revenue into money and from money into a series of other commodities for the purpose of private consumption. But in this connection one should not overlook the little fact that C is a commodity value which has not cost the capitalist anything. It is the embodiment of surplus labor, which originally stepped forth onto the stage as a component of the commodity capital C. This C is thus itself already linked in its existence to the circuit of the capital value in process, and if this comes to a head or is disturbed in some way, it is not only the consumption of C that is restricted, or completely ceases, but in addition the market for the set of commodities that form the replacement for C. This is similarly the case if CM goes awry or only a portion of C can be sold. We have seen that CMC, as the circulation of the capitalist's revenue, enters into the capital circulation only insofar as C is a value portion of C capital in its functional form as commodity capital. But as soon as it becomes independent